Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Welcome to this holiday weekend. I hope you're kicking back right now and enjoying. There's a question that I've been wrestling with all week, which is why did Cassidy Hutchinson, former Trump administration official, the star witness of Tuesday's January 6th hearing, why did she decide to come forward and testify publicly? Hutchinson was a Trump ally, one might even say a loyalist, and she already testified in 3 committee depositions. Those are recorded behind closed doors. But then something happened, and she agreed to come out and testify publicly. And the committee felt confident enough in her testimony to make her the sole star witness of a special surprise hearing that they knew everyone would have their eyes on. And the best we can tell is what happened was that she switched lawyers. Initially, Hutchinson was represented by an attorney recommended to her by Trump aides, paid for with money from Trump's Political Action Committee. She then fired that lawyer after, quote, he suggested she not testify publicly following the conclusion of 20 hours of closed depositions. Then Hutchinson hired someone new, a Republican lawyer named Jody Hunt. Then she agreed to sit for a 4th deposition with the committee. And it was in that deposition, reportedly, where she revealed new information, which led to her public testimony this week. And this shift brings into focus, I think, there are many ways to cooperate with the committee. You can testify publicly in an incredibly forthcoming way, like Cassidy Hutchinson eventually did. You can refuse to comply at all, right? That's one end of the spectrum. Trump advisors Stephen Bannon and Peter Navarro, both of whom face criminal charges from the Justice Department as a result. You can also show up for the deposition, but basically refuse to actually comply by taking your constitutional Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate yourself for every question. That's what apparently coup plotters like John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, and the former Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn did. In fact, Mike Flynn pleaded the fifth to the question, do you believe in the peaceful transfer of power? Or you can get an expensive lawyer and comply with a subpoena or testimonial request technically. You show up, you answer questions, but you just find that you can't remember that much. You blame your faulty memory for inability to accurately answer all the committee's questions, who said what on what day, I don't know. That's short of pure obstruction, certainly, but it also appears to be the preferred outcome for Trump's allies. And in fact, this week, committee chair Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi tried to use Hutchinson's public example to shame those who fell into that latter camp.
I want to speak directly to the handful of witnesses who have been outliers in our investigation, the small number who have defied us outright, those whose memories have failed them again and again on the most important details, and to those who fear Donald Trump and his enablers. Because of this courageous woman and others like her, your attempt to hide the truth from the American people will fail.
Now, it's not very surprising that some witnesses close to Trump are hesitant to participate fully with the committee. We've known for a very long time that Trump runs his business and his political career, all of his operations, basically like a mob boss. That comes with the kind of no-snitching attitude that just pervades his organization, where those close to the ex-president are expected to keep their mouths shut. And we've seen tons of examples of this. We saw some examples of this, for instance, back during the Mueller investigation, when, for example, Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort broke his plea agreement by lying to investigators who had granted him a plea deal when he was supposed to be cooperating. Trump's first national security advisor, the aforementioned Mike Flynn, did cooperate with investigators, you might remember, before he tried to withdraw his guilty plea for lying to the FBI and go on the offensive. Flynn went on to ingratiate himself with Trump as a believer of the big lie of a stolen election. And it's worth noting that both of these men who initially said they were going to cooperate and tell what they knew and then didn't, that both these men, Manafort and Flynn, received presidential pardons at the end of it. Which, of course, plays into the notion that if you're loyal, if you're a good soldier, if you don't snitch, Trump might reward you in the end. That is worth keeping in mind when you consider that Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who clearly is just at the center of all of this, right, initially agreed to cooperate with the January 6th committee. Remember, he voluntarily turned over 8,000 documents to the committee before appearing to suddenly shift gears and decide to stonewall. Now, we don't know why exactly Meadows changed his mind, why he changed direction. All we know, in terms of what's publicly reported, is that just weeks after the January 6th committee formed, Trump's PAC gave Meadows' nonprofit a donation of $1 million. So one view of the situation, based on the timeline, could be Trump dangles the carrot for potential witnesses who may hope for a pardon in the future or a donation or who knows what else in exchange for their silence. The ex-president's tactics are not always of the carrot variety, right? Back in 2019, former Trump fixer Michael Cohen testified before Congress that Trump tried to intimidate him from speaking publicly.
By coming today, I have caused my family to be the target of personal, scurrilous attacks by the president and his lawyer, trying to intimidate me from appearing before this panel. Mr. Trump called me a rat for choosing to tell the truth, much like a mobster would do when one of his men decides to cooperate with the government. I hope this committee and all members of Congress on both sides of the aisle make it clear that as a nation, we should not tolerate attempts to intimidate witnesses before Congress.
Cohen's compared explicitly the ex-president's conduct to a mobster many times, including this week in response to this presentation from Committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney.
We have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee." Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses. Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition."
It's like something out of a mafia movie when the hired goon tries to scare the key witness out of cooperating with the feds. Now, Congresswoman Cheney did not say who those messages were directed to, but two sources familiar tell NBC News the second message Congressman Cheney read was a call to Hutchinson. Witness tampering, of course, is a federal crime. And this week, Congresswoman Cheney implied she expects the Department of Justice to be looking at potential criminal referrals.
So you think some of the testimony you received wasn't truthful because people were threatened?
The way that I would put it is that it gives us a real insight into how people around the former president are operating, into the extent to which they believe that they can affect the testimony of witnesses before the committee. And it's something we take very seriously. And it's something that people should be aware of. It's a very serious issue, and I would imagine the Department of Justice would be very interested in and would take that very seriously as well.
Of course, we don't know how involved the ex-president himself is in these schemes, but that's sort of the point, right? I mean, after all, the mob boss is really the one who directly commits the crime. It's not the mob boss who calls people up and says, you know, don't tell them anything. But regardless of whether or not Trump is directly ordering his own cronies or intermediaries or cutouts to, you know, give a friendly call and say the boss knows you're loyal to scare witnesses, it's clear that in the case of Hutchinson, it didn't work. And the thing is, sometimes one person talks, and I mean really talks like Hutchinson, all of a sudden lots of others want to make sure they get their side of the story heard too.